Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. The old, I wouldn't work here if you paid me answer. Good for you, OP. It takes a lot to be a nurse, in my observations. Here we go. How not to recruit a nurse. In nursing school, you have clinical days. The day before clinical, you have to go to the hospital and pick a patient you'll work with the next day. You'll also have a chance to work as a CNA while in school to gain more experience and make a little money because it's difficult to work full-time and go through nursing school. There were 2 hospitals in my small town. I worked at Hospital A in the ICU as a CNA. My clinicals were in the larger hospital, Hospital B. I worked a shift at my hospital and ran over to the other one across town to pick my patient and get my pre-clinical work done. It was about 30 minutes after 7 when I got there. Most hospital shifts you work are 12 hours, 7 to 7. I knew I was going to be on a med-surg floor, so I got on the elevator to ride up and look through my paperwork to find out what unit I'd be at the next day. A lady in a pantsuit with a hospital badge was already on the elevator and gave me a look like I'd peed in her Cheerios. Okay, I just moved to the side and finally found my paper letting me know what floor and unit I needed to go to. In a really ugly tone, the pantsuit asked me, "Where are you headed?" Staying polite, "I'm headed to 3N. She slammed the button and I just said, "Thank you." As we were riding, she turned to me and started chewing me out. "It's not appropriate for you to be coming in 20 minutes after shift change. We've been understaffed all day and those units are slammed right now." I just kind of stared at her for a second and thought, I'm not going to be disturbing the nurses, and if I have to wait on a chart, that's fine. I don't intend on interrupting report, but I just said, okay. If anything, her face got angrier. My floor arrived and she stepped out with me and kept pace with me as I headed to the nurses' station. I went to the side and took a look at the assignment board to see if anyone had a diagnosis I hadn't worked with before, then sat down out of the way and waited quietly because the charge nurses were discussing assignments. When they finished, I asked the charge nurses if there was a patient I should pick. I do this because sometimes there were interesting procedures or I'd get a chance to practice my skills the next day. As I was waiting, pantsuit lady watched me, and when she saw me sit down, she immediately snapped her fingers at me and pointed down to the floor and said, "You, come here." The voice was nasty enough that it stopped several people mid-report to find out what was going on. I stood up and approached her, and she grabbed my sleeve and pulled me over closer to the charge nurses. Ignoring me and talking directly to the charge nurses, she proceeded to tell them that I was their aide and she wanted them to make sure I was written up for being late. I realized then that she thought I worked there. I was a lot less confrontational or aggressive then. My, how nursing changes you. But I never really got the chance to say anything as she jerked her hand away from me and wiped it like she'd just touched poo. Looked at me with a face I could only describe as sour lemon smugness and walked away. The charge looked at me and said, "We already have an aide, but sure could use you." "Let me see how." She trailed off as I held out my hand and said, "I don't work here. I'm with school name and I'm here to pick out a patient for clinicals tomorrow." Does that lady always treat people like they're dogs? The charge nurse stared at me for a second and then started laughing and said, "Stupid bee, don't mind her. We all hate her." She then asked, "How much longer do you have?" I replied that I graduate in 6 months. I also asked if they had any interesting procedures or if they had a patient that a one-to-one student nurse would make easier to handle. She also asked where I planned on working after I graduated. I just looked down the hallway where the pantsuit had gone and said, "Well, not here," which made her laugh even more. I had a truly relaxing clinical the next day with a sweet elderly lady with dementia and a minor medical condition. We folded laundry together to keep her busy and to keep her from pulling at her surgical sites. What was really fun about it is that the next semester when representatives come to try to recruit you to the hospital, I got to reply to a question about why I wasn't interested in their hospital. I got to say that I didn't appreciate the way they treated their staff and tell the story. There was recognition in their eyes when I described the lady, and they shook their heads when I told them about the event. Plus, I knew that my hospital was waiting for me to graduate so I could come to work in the ICU, which was my dream at the time. And it was for a bit more pay than the other hospital was offering anyway. And our second story. Guy wants to fight me, I guess. This was a long time ago, pre-internet in fact. I, 17-year-old male, was working a dishwashing job in the 80s. A newish dishwasher challenged me to a fight. I didn't want to fight. I really liked my job. The pay was $3.40 an hour. I was also fed a big meal at work. This was a ballroom kind of place that did weddings, dinners, and Sunday brunch. And I know it sounds oxymoronic, but dare I say, high-end buffet? I loved it. Food at home was locked up in a closet, and I never got enough to eat, so work was heaven. Back in the day, pre-internet, there were lots of fights if you were a male. In my experience, you could get in a fight even if you were avoiding conflict. It just happened a bunch, or I was just lucky. Maybe it was because I was dressed out of fashion and my stepmother would take all my money and get me those plastic blue jeans called Tough Skins. They would melt if you lit them on fire. Don't ask how I know. You would wear out your knees before you wore a hole in them. I had the dorkiest glasses, too. I was branded an outcast. Get off the bus and 15 people get off at your stop. A circle forms and you have to fight someone. I lost all my fights. It sucked. I cried. Just a part of life. If I had magic powers, I would make bullying go away, but back in the day, no one cared. It was not physical build that cost me the fights. I think it was confidence and my conflict avoidance. At home, I was the older brother, so in all those home fights, I tried to fight at 80% because I didn't want to hurt my kid brother while he would try to clobber me. I had too much empathy. Also at home, my stepmother had this 110-foot-long cliff that was 10 feet tall in the backyard that had a septic field behind it that no truck could drive on. Thus, I spent my days with a shovel and a wheelbarrow moving dirt, even in the rain, to turn this cliff into a gentle slope for my stepmother's epic dream flower bed. I had the arms and upper body strength despite not being on a sports team. This comes into the story. I told the new dishwasher I didn't want to fight. He therefore called me names and said I was afraid and so on. I ignored him. This continued for a month. It was the theme of busy Friday nights and also Sunday mornings. He also wanted to talk about how I was afraid to fight him and how I was so weak and so on. He called me those classic 1980s derogatory terms that are now out of vogue. This eventually got old, so one Sunday morning when he challenged me yet again, I said, "Let's fight then." He was surprised I said yes to a fight. We went outside to the parking lot. It had just rained. He asked again if I wanted to fight. I said I really did. I've heard all about how I can't fight, and I'm afraid for like a month, so I want to fight and end it already. He said he was just joking and he really didn't want to fight. I told him he wanted to fight, and I was going to give him exactly what he wanted, and I'd waited so long for. Now, I didn't really want to hurt him. As rude as he had been, I saw him as sort of like my little brother. Annoying, sure, but not someone I want to injure. We work together after all, and it's at a place I like to work, and yet I did want to let him know not to try this crap again. He looked truly frightened. I grabbed his squishy body and put him on a wet car hood and dried the car off from the rain. I used him like a chamois or one of those big car wash sponges. These were not nice cars. They were owned by dishwashers and cooks making $3 to $7 an hour. Even so, I don't think I scraped any of them, or if I did, you couldn't tell. I buffed each car with this dishwasher one after another. He was wiggly, but the friction was low, so honestly, it wasn't all that much of a workout. He yelped a bit and seemed genuinely afraid. In the end, he was absolutely soaked. I was too, if only by proximity. He did me the favor of telling everyone about what had happened, and the general consensus was that it was funny, so I didn't face work consequences. After that, I got to wash dishes in peace. And our next story. We know what we're doing. Just add the printers. We started instant issue debit/credit cards recently, probably 2 years ago, because we decided to join the 21st century, and they worked great at our test location, so we decided to add them to all of our locations. The company we're using did a good job of setting everything up so every location has a printer and you can easily see what location you're using and change to the correct location. It's practically foolproof. Well, you know what they say, when the world creates something foolproof, the world creates a bigger fool? Despite the fact that there were large icons and notices saying which location they were printing to, the employees were printing to the wrong location, meaning that members were thinking they're about to get their debit and credit cards and it was going to a different branch. Sometimes the branch was 2 hours away. We sent out procedures to these people. We set up their default so that their branch matched their printer. They continued to print to the wrong one. So I decided to just remove the other branch printers from their logins. The only printer on each person's username was the one at their branch. This worked fine for about 5 months. That's when we hired a new branch manager at one of the branches. She was a loan officer at another branch and was moved. For some reason, she really hated the fact that she didn't have access to her old branch to print cards as well as her new one, which made no sense to me. But she really wanted access, so I gave it to her. You'd think that'd be enough. No, she wanted all of her people to have access to other printers. I tried to explain to her what was happening before, but she didn't care. She pitched a fit at everyone, and I was made out to look like a bad guy for not giving her a simple request. So I finally relented and gave all her people access. You can guess what started happening. Yep, her people started printing to the wrong printers almost immediately. They just couldn't pay attention long enough to pick the correct one after changing to print to another branch for some reason. What's even worse is that her head teller 3 teams ordered supplies for her branch under another branch's printer. She was constantly down waiting on cards or a ribbon. She asked me to fix it, and I told her what I'd done in the past, and she was happy to let me remove the printers again. And our last story. My mom overthrew HOA committee. So my mom's part of a 55-plus senior condo community and tried to join the HOA committee. She'd asked too many questions about where the money was going. They raised the HOA fee 10% last year for maintenance costs, but they drained the pool and shut it down. They collect over $20K a month in fees from the 60 condos, and most are living off SS. One of the board members commented that she's either with the committee or with the community. Confused by that statement, she stepped down. She started emailing them her concerns, to which they told her she was harassing them and will be blocked, but since they're unprofessional, they accidentally kept emailing her and were discussing tactics to deal with mom and keep the community under control. My mom's kind of crazy, so bear with me. She turned those emails into flyers and stuck it on everyone's front door and went door to door to petition for the president of the HOA to step down. She got over 50% signed. The president refused to resign. Fast forward, there's a meeting to vote. Their opening statement was that the vote was going to be canceled because they didn't have quorum? Spelling? I don't know. Basically, more of the community needed to be present for a vote. Keep in mind this is senior citizen living. It's hard for them to attend. So, guess the people in charge will continue to be in charge. Nah, my mom filibustered the meeting, took it over. I can detail it later if anyone's interested, but the outcome was that she and the community and elders that did come decided she was the president. Volunteers for all the positions were filled, and they declared that the property management is fired as well. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.